everybody. My name is Alan. On behalf of the crew, I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Bridging Heaven and Earth. You know, we were talking earlier, we have a meeting before the show. I mean, as most of you know, this is a live show. We do it live. And probably this is the 121st show. We started probably about 6 years ago. And we very rarely edit anything that you end up seeing. I mean, if you're seeing it for the first time when we do it live in Santa Barbara, but for all the rest of the cities, we rarely edit a show. So everything is done live. And it's all done at a public access facility, and it's all done with volunteers. And we were just thinking that, and we've never missed a show yet. And the quality of the show is generally, for a live show, is extraordinary, especially with volunteers who haven't devoted their lives to the various skills that they do on the Bridging Heaven and Earth show. And we were just saying that what it is really, it's almost like a miracle. And what it is really is that there's such a hunger and a need for that. The focus of what Bridging Heaven and Earth is about is that dedicated to the oneness, dedicated to that love that we all, in our hearts, in our deepest being, know is the connection between us all. Know is the truth. Know is whatever way we look at religion or God, something in the root of that, in the root of our hearts, knows that that's the truth of it. And we were all thinking that really it's that collaboration between us all, that all the letters and all the emails and all the calls we get and all the people who help us, and almost in every one of the 40 cities we're in, there's a local person who through one set of circumstances or another helps us get the show on in their local area. And it's just that expanding vibration, that expanding wave, ripple that is going through this world of that vibration of love that is what the Bridging Heaven and Earth show is about. And you know, if you've been watching the show, you know we have a foundation, and that foundation is to spread that love and to perpetuate that love and to just get it moving at a stronger and more powerful rate. And we were saying that there was so much opportunity for us all to participate in that. So, I mean, I just wanted to thank everyone out there who supported us so incredibly all these years, and also say that now is a time that we can really jump off and really take all that we've done and expand it and expand it and expand it, and only for one reason: to spread that vibration of love stronger, to spread that inclusion stronger, to spread that feeling of love, of the connection, of the lack of separation between us all, to get that as a reality in this world rather than the opposite, rather than how often we see the distinctions and the differences between us. But if we go deeper or further or in more, we know that there is one love. And again, we have videos, and we have a guest with us tonight whose life is dedicated to experiencing that and sharing that. We have with us Robert Sachs, who's an educator. He's an educator of Tibetan Ayurvedic medicine. He's an educator in a conscious way of living and dying. He's an educator in Feng Shui and astrology. He's an educator in really sharing that vibration of love, making it real in a human life, how we live, how we walk, how we breathe, how we interact with each other. He's the author of 4 books, The 9-Star Key, Health for Life, Rebirth into Pure Land, Perfect Endings, Conscious Approach to Dying and Death. And again, more important is his life is a dedication to that perpetuation, to that vibration of love. And we're honored to have Robert here with us tonight. And we also we've gotten a lot of calls about certain of the musical guests we've had and certain of the videos they were live when we first did them. We had a lot of calls about Kailash, who was on that incredible show with Jazz Maheen a while back. So we have a video of him. We tried to get him on the show again, but he's all over Europe, but he couldn't come in for the live show. And we also have the song that Lessia and I wrote together, All the Same Love, that really is really what it's about. We are all the same love. So we have that video tonight, and we have the Kailash video, and we have Robert here live on the set. So again, thank you, and the opportunity is there. So you'll see the email, you'll see the telephone number. If you want to participate with us in spreading that love, in getting that vibration out, in bringing it to your city, in doing more in your city, we're here, and that's what we're about. So as we normally do at this time, join me in a short meditation, then Robert will be here, we'll have some incredible videos, and it's just an opportunity for us all to go more into that experience and then take it out and take it in and take it out, in breath and out breath of that love. So please join me. Thank you. So the first video tonight is, as I said a little while ago, All the Same Love. It was written by Lessia and I. Lessia is singing it. Just listen to the words, let it carry you. We are all the same love.
We
the same love. So we're on the set with Robert. Welcome.
Thank you, Alan.
So was there one moment when you knew that your life was going to, in a way, be dedicated to experiencing that love and sharing that love?
I think probably one of the most pivotal moments for me was I was hitchhiking from Amsterdam to Paris. And it had been a magical mystery tour so far, going through Europe. It had been very strange.
Was this like college age?
Yeah, and I was very innocent about everything. I mean, I really was. And there I was. I'd been in London on a really strange series of events, and I'd gone up to Amsterdam, and of course the student hostels are in the red light district, which I had never seen in my entire life. And then we wanted to leave. I was with a friend. We get in this bus.
When I got there, I wanted to move in.
Yeah, right.
That's a whole other story.
Yeah, that's a whole other story, though. So anyway, there's this guy. We were hitchhiking. This green Volkswagen bus pulls up. You know, this is in the early '70s, and this man that was red-haired, bearded, looked very much like the red-haired Jesus that most people thought of as being Jesus at that time. And what happened was we were going down the freeway to Paris, and I just said, "Where do you live?" And he said, "I live in a meditation center in Scotland." And I said, "Well, what's that like?" And he said, "It's the kind of place that every time you turn a corner, you walk into yourself." And that was it. It was like at that point,
wow.
I decided what I was going to do is I went to my university back in Cleveland, and I wanted to find out if there was a junior year abroad program. I found that there was one about 60 miles south of this place. It was Samueling Tibetan Center. And my parents thought I was going there to do my junior year abroad. I was really trying to get to this meditation center. And I went there. I went to one yoga class. I had my first real vegetarian meal. I went to one Tibetan puja, and I went to bed for 5 days. I couldn't move. All I could do is get myself out of bed to go down into the meditation hall and just sit there. And I felt like something was just raining all over me. I didn't know what it was. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand anything they were chanting. But what happened was that it felt like at that point something was finally I felt like I was coming home finally. And so I would say probably at that point a lot of things began to cascade, interest in Oriental medicine, suddenly an interest in astrology, but things I think that somehow that were there in this late and upper middle class Jewish kid from Cleveland suddenly just started happening. And from that point on it's just been kind of like a flow of events from then.
So you remember specifically at that moment your life basically changed?
I would say so. I mean, I think what happens when you're younger, when you really reflect back, you usually find that there's certain things that fit and other things that don't. You don't know why they fit and why they don't at the time. And maybe you feel like an outcast or you're very marginal in terms of your friends. And then suddenly as you begin to have events like that, it's like all those sort of like misfirings earlier on suddenly begin to make sense. So I would say probably I was aware of being in some ways connected to something that I didn't know what it was. But I think at that point, when I was about 19 or 20 and in that situation, it finally began to make sense.
And Buddhism was your path into that realization of that experience?
I would say so. What I tell people, I was born Jewish to avoid being a Catholic priest one more time. And so what happened was it gave me, in some ways, permission. What I saw in Buddhism was something which I had actually sort of experienced. It's in no ways am I wanting to make myself analogous to the story of the Buddha, but when I was being raised, what happened was we lived in an area in Ohio during the mid-'60s, and because we were Jewish living in a small suburb, my father was a veterinarian, we were firebombed out of our neighborhood for being Jewish. Seriously. We were firebombed. It was
in what years was this?
This was about 1962, 63,
really?
During the Civil Rights era. Yeah.
Wow.
And what happened was we moved out of this area from the outskirts of Cleveland into a nice Jewish neighborhood. And in this nice Jewish neighborhood, I began to identify with all the Catholics and the Protestants, who, what I also found out was that there was a lot of anti-Gentile sentiment on the part of the Jews in the community. And so I realized...
Everybody's got to hate somebody.
Everybody's got to hate somebody. So it was...
And
it's
great that way, isn't it?
And for me, what it was if what you find is that it's... in terms of having negative feelings for
And then
somebody.
everybody could hate the blacks. So I mean,
Absolutely.
and then you could,
It's just
you
a
could
total
coalesce.
That's right.
Now you could hate the, you know, it's
Everybody.
like,
Everybody
it's
can get
a beautiful
together.
thing. It's really a wonderful
But
thing.
what it taught me was that it had nothing to do with these individual groups. It had to
Right.
do with the nature of the mind. And so
Right.
when I was introduced to something that talked specifically about the nature of the mind, that was not really, I mean, even to call Buddhism an ism is a harsh thing to do. To me, it was about the nature of the mind. That's what appealed to me. And so that's where I ended up. And that's been pretty much what I've worked with over all these years.
And the tenets for that were like a lot of reading and meditation, or, I mean, how does like Buddhism progress? How does that experience, I mean, there is an experience of that lack of separation, of beyond mind, or how would you describe it?
I think a lot of that's what it's about is, I'm sure there are traditional trainings to help a person sort of like unpeel that. Basically, what I say, I look at even the phrase atonement for one's sins as really about at-one-ment. What you're trying to do is get past that sense of separation. And I think that every tradition has its way of working that. What I would say is probably, and even to this day, working with Tibetan teachers, I would say Buddhism is still working through its experimental phase of seeing what works and what doesn't. And although what I found out was, over time, that I was doing things pretty much in accordance with how a lot of teachers were wanting people to progress, I wouldn't say that I had a game plan at all. It really.
Well, what did work for you?
Probably a combination of things. I would say in the beginning, literally just being in a meditative environment where people, in that situation, community, having a group of people around you that had a very similar mindset about what they wanted to do. That was very important. And then over time, once that becomes something that you begin to internalize and you work into your marriage and your relationships, and then I think what happens is you begin to take it into meditative processes, more reading and studying. And I would say more recently what's happened is I've emerged out of doing a lot of formal practice, which I had done for years. In fact, what I would say is that I was living almost like a monastic in a secular environment. What I would say is I'm really beginning to reemerge and finding the value in family and friends and loved ones. It's much more important now. And really feeling like that's now where I'm getting the inspiration. So it's very much been a process of going into, in some ways, a more traditional environment, working in more traditional ways, and then in some ways realizing that it's all one taste. And what you have to begin to do is in some ways realize at what point that you begin to even turn meditation into a habit, and you begin to step back from that and using it in a much more spontaneous way, which also means being more spontaneous with friends and loved ones.
Yeah, you're like love in motion rather than you have divisions in that. I mean, we do that. Mind does that too.
Exactly. And that's been the real challenge for me in recent years, is really beginning to. In fact, the one spiritual teacher that I work with and my wife Melanie works with, his name is Shumer Rinpoche, who is in some ways what you could say is in Tibetan lineage he is on the same par, religiously or spiritually speaking, as His Holiness Dalai Lama. And in my most recent conversation with the Shermapa, he told me that I just needed to abandon all spiritual concepts.
Right. I was going to say the concepts are another trick of mind to hold us into the division and the finite.
Exactly. For a while they prop you up, and then after
you
a
need
while,
them for a while,
and then after a while you suddenly realize that they're just making you stiff and uncomfortable.
Right.
And then you need to get rid of them, and then you free fall for a while.
Right. Because we're so used to leaning on that cane, even though it's a slightly rubber cane.
It's it's the illusion that it's solid, and then what ends up happening, I think, is that I think when I really began to experience the letting go of that, it was definitely what I think in Western terms would be called the dark night of the soul, where you really suddenly are confronted with your own mind, and you try and assess for yourself what you have tamed and what you have not tamed in your consciousness and in your spirit. And to find out what has worked.
How do you do?
Yeah, really, yeah, exactly. That's how.
What a mess that is. No.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting.
No, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Right. So when did you start like writing and sharing, your experience and your information that you saw that was your vehicle?
Well, what happened was, I would say probably about 10 years into working with these traditions and studying, my wife Melanie, we were always interested in preventive health care. And from our studies of Tibetan Buddhism, we got involved in Tibetan medicine. We also got involved with macrobiotics and Chinese medicine. And what happened was that we began to pull material together, and people would ask us if we would share what we were doing, whether it be from the standpoint of meditation and the tradition of medicine Buddha, or if it would be this from the standpoint of healing or from other aspects of healing, for example, astrology. And so what happened was, with all the material we had, we would do presentations, we would do weekend courses, and we got tired of going to Kinko's. We got tired of handing people photocopied notes and things that were scribbled down. And so what happened was, we began to look at the fact that we had actually gathered an amazing amount of material, and it was just a question of finally realizing that we could organize it and put it into some kind of succinct fashion that would help a lot more people than we were doing just by handing them out as reprints. And so I would say probably the first book I really got interested in doing was a book on the system of astrology called Nine-Star Key, which in Chinese is called Nine-House Astrology, and in Tibetan tradition it's called the system of Meiwas. And I began to piece the material together, and it took about probably 2 years to really put it in a format, and then another 2 years before any publisher really wanted to look at it. And that was in 1989, 1990 when that began to happen. And then from that point on, there was a lot of other material that we had that we began to finally piece together. I would say probably my book on Tibetan medicine and the Nine-Star Key are much more like that. The books on death and dying that we did were more or less experiential, just writing from the heart what was going on in the form of stories.
And there was a specific instance that got you involved in death and dying. You had a baby daughter, I think it was, who had sudden infant death syndrome.
That's right. That's right. I would say that probably like anybody that's involved with holistic health care in the beginning, you're convinced that if people eat brown rice, they will they'll live forever, and if they had
always healthy
and always healthy, et cetera, et cetera.
Another concept.
Another concept. But what happens is, unfortunately, I think it's still carried in alternative health care, where people believe if they eat the right thing or they do the right meditation, that they will be immortal in this particular body.
Right.
Immortality is a whole other issue.
Right.
But this whole body is that the first sign. The Tibetans say the first sign of death is birth. And what happened for us was that we had this baby girl that was born in 1983, and what happened was, and we learned this later on, that according to people that have gathered information about SIDS, or sudden infant death, is that the only common factor in sudden infant death is all the parents have premonitions.
Really?
And most of the parents don't talk about it.
Wow.
So what happened was, I was thinking these things, Melanie was thinking these things, but of course you don't want to talk.
I mean, thinking these things, that this baby is not going to be here for long.
Yeah, we would be amazed every time we would wake up in the morning and she'd still be alive.
Was she your first child?
No, she was our third.
And so you never had these
never had any thoughts about our other children at all like this.
Wow.
And that's also very common, that it's not necessarily that it's just the first child and you have anxieties about this child.
Right.
But what happened that made it very powerful was that, and you've had Lama Ola Naidal here before on the show. He's a very close friend of mine, and he came to visit us in Kentucky. And the night our daughter died, he was with us. And we found her in the morning, and we gave her body to him in the morning, because that's when we found her. And we said, do something. And at that point, all of her fluids had stopped. Her face was blue and compressed. And from lying in one position all night. And again, as parents, when your baby sleeps through the night, you're kind of excited the first opportunity you have a night to get a full night's rest. So we didn't think that anything untowards had happened, other than some dreams that I talk in my book, Rebirth into Pure Land. I mentioned that because there are a lot of things that happened in my dreams that night that indicated that something had happened. Anyway, Lama Ola did what's called POA, or transference of consciousness, at the time of death. And what happened was we literally watched her whole physical being change. I mean, we watched things happen that normally medically can't be defined or explained, where the fluids began to run again, her face became back to normal positioning, normal facial structure. And these things are unexplained in medical terms, but we saw this, so we could see the effects of POA. And from that, I would say it changed my whole perspective on how to present about healthcare, but also what it did was it began to help us connect with people.
It didn't bring her back to life. All it did was...
It actually, what it does is it ejects her consciousness to a place
Right.
of what's called a Pure Land state, a state of a very positive rebirth. And what happened was that in that situation, there were a lot of what I would say miracles that took place. It was the first time that Lama Ola ever gave POA in America. It really launched a lot of what Lama Ola has done in this country from that point on. But what happened for me and Melanie was it really changed how we viewed healthcare. And it also put us in touch with a lot of people that wanted to learn more about conscious dying. And from that point on, as well as teaching classes on astrology and teaching classes about, how to exercise and eat right, was becoming more and more in touch with families that wanted to know how they could help people just pass in their dying transitions. And so that's what got that going for us.
Wow. So, I mean, basically you're saying that, the whole thing was, evolutionary and, one step at a time and one foot in front of another, and there it was. And all of a sudden there was a book, and all of a sudden there was another, it just
Exactly.
organically unfolded.
Yeah, I mean, I think the book Rebirth into Pure Land was written, basically, it was kind of a funny thing. What happened for me was that I decided to write it, and then I was teaching a class on Medicine Buddha. And a woman came to the class and she said, there's a job going in hospice, you should look into it. And I went, well, I've been out of social work now for 2 or 3 years, and usually most of those kinds of organizations hire from other organizations. They don't go out into the field necessarily. And then she called me on Monday. She said, I just interviewed for this job, but it's really your job. And I said, well, okay, fine. So I called, they interviewed me, and I got the job that afternoon.
Wow.
But I think also for me what it was that job was preparation for me to work with my father's passing. And that was what I account in the next book, which was Perfect Endings, where what I really wanted to do was look at all sorts of different traditions and look at and tell stories of people that I'd met and how they managed to work through their own dying process. And so it was definitely like one led into the other. Right. And it was not, like I said, it's like I would not have thought that my going into hospice was to prepare me for writing that book or for working with my own father's death.
If we think anything, it's not as
That's
we
right.
think it's.
Exactly.
So that's why at some point we don't have to bother with it.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
All right, so maybe what we'll do now is do the second video. I know everybody's been really wanting to see Kailash again. We tried to get him back on, but his schedule just wouldn't allow it when we had shows with availability. So this is the inner world music of Kailash. You'll see him play the drums, the didgeridoo. It's just a beautiful piece. It's just settle into it. It's 10 minutes long. You can really have an experience. So Kailash. Wow, that was beautiful. So yeah, so everybody who wanted to see that, there it is. So we're back on the set with Robert. So the more you got into all these different things and all these seeming different tools, you found out that they were really, in a way, to get you to like be in the moment, to be here now, to, you know, drop all the concepts, the identities, all the weight we kind of carry around in our backpack. So how do you progress in that? How do you move into that, where that experience of being in the moment, of being here now, is more of a reality for you?
I think for me is to, I think after doing meditative processes for a number of years, I think you begin to notice when you're suddenly beginning to try and contrive something. And I think also what helps is when you're working with other people. And you'll find that when you're working with somebody and you're trying to teach them something and you find out that it's completely off the mark, or it's not going to be a paradigm that they embrace, you suddenly realize you have to step back and be aware of the presence of their spirit and what they need in the moment. And I think it actually sort of makes you much more conscious of being more truthful with yourself, because if you're not truthful with yourself and you're just trying to snow them with information, then eventually they don't get any benefit from it.
Yeah, their eyes start spinning. They
go to sleep on you, or
Right.
they just nod, and then what happens is it's just a waste of time for everybody.
So I mean, so each person, if you're trying to like impart information, you have to impart it to that vehicle, to that person.
Absolutely.
So you have to be there, and at every moment see where the right,
where it goes in, where it doesn't, where they drift off, etc. So you suddenly become aware of when you're in touch with someone's presence more. And I think what's kind of funny about that is when you're teaching something like astrology, like the 9-star key astrology, or something like Tibetan Ayurveda, and you're working with concepts and you're working with sort of like, in some ways, conceptually blockbusting and helping someone to work with a new paradigm. There's a big difference between that and then working with death, which is kind of like letting go of all that. The funniest thing that I used to observe in myself when I was working with people as a hospice social worker was that they would, the person that was dying would have a hard time, let's say, talking about dying. and or even talking about what was going on with them, because normally they talk about the weather and they talk about what's on TV and things like that. And I would find that what was very strange for me was I couldn't keep awake when they would be talking to me. If they were talking about the weather, if they were talking about whatever kind of things that they normally talked about, because you could almost feel like they weren't even in that part of their being. They were struggling with somehow trying to get out of it. And what I observed was they didn't even notice I was falling asleep. And the minute they got real, I woke up. And we would have like, a 30-second interaction. And what I realized was that later on when I would talk with the family, it was only that 30 seconds that mattered to them. Everything else was just kind of like them trying to get to a place in themselves where they could actually talk about something in an authentic way. And to me, what
prevents us from doing that on a more regular basis, all of us?
What I tell people is that we all know what's going on in every moment. We just agree not to blow each other's cover.
Why don't we blow our own cover?
Why don't we blow our own cover? I think gradually what we do is in the process is that we learn through any kind of contemplative discipline. Hopefully what happens is there's some kind of tripless process that begins to make you aware when you're just faking yourself out. Hopefully that's what happens more, and you can laugh more at what's going on. And I think that a lot of what prevents us from doing that is just essentially, I don't know, maybe an awkwardness of being that has to in some ways realize that you came into this existence with some kind of ego structure and certain kinds of conceptual frameworks that you've held yourself together with. And so much of what this world is about is, now that you know the blueprint, let's deconstruct it. But deconstructing that blueprint is a life's work. And so in many respects, I think that that's what also gives us, I think, the compassion. If we didn't have to go through some kind of labyrinth, if we didn't have to somehow deconstruct that and go through those awkwardnesses in ourselves, then we wouldn't have the patience, the time, the being able to joke with somebody with it. We would take it so seriously, and we would bore ourselves and we would bore other people. So I think that it's actually a part of the spiritual being having a human experience thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So do you find that when you go around, I mean, you travel all over the world teaching Ayurvedic medicine and the star key method and all that, that people are more and more coming into a desire to be in that moment, to be real?
It's kind of like looking at, there's an old Oriental saying, which has got a front, it's got a back. The bigger the front, the bigger the back. I think that what we're looking at, and there was one amazing Tibetan teacher, his name was Namgyal Rinpoche, that once said that, if we look at an Aquarian age or an enlightened age, or what we think to be an enlightened age, that we can think of it as being where there's this mass transformation of society, where everything suddenly becomes light and enlightenment around us. He says, but at the same time, a time like this can be a time of massive institutionalization and a lot of structures that are in some ways very, very oppressive. But at the same time, there is, when those structures are present, a lot of energy in people transforming themselves. So I think that it's both. I think that there are a lot of structures that are seemingly solid around us, and I think the people that are really wanting to connect with light are more intent and intense about connecting with that light. So my experience is finding that the people that are committed, I mean, they just really want to get to it, and the people that don't have any interest in it, they just bypass it. They don't even see it coming. They don't even see it going. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I've observed with that, and there's a lot of women in the audience generally here, but also in a lot of these settings. And I think what a lot of teachers have said is that what we are looking at is the reascension of the wisdom principle, which is in fact the female principle. And so what's happening is women are emerging as the gatherers and teachers and passing on of those traditions. So what I see when we're teaching, and my wife Melanie and I both teach in different populations all over the world, what we're seeing is there are certainly a lot of women that are involved. The men that are there are usually fairly sensitive and intense kind of men, but the men are of a minority, and I think a lot of what it is it's very hard to shed the male archetype of the moment. I think it's very, very difficult for men to do that.
And what do you see that as being, the male archetype?
I think right now, just in terms of how societies have structured themselves, in terms of technology, in terms of how things have formed with respect to nation states, the formations of families, that, and I pretty much agree with someone like with Ken Wilber in his book Brief History of Everything, where he talks about that there's probably no real plan as to why things have become matriarchal or patriarchal in any particular period of time. It's just like this is how things evolve. And I think at this time that a lot of men are beginning to question the kind of intense sort of like hunter-gatherer type of roles that they've taken on, and realizing that there's certain aspects of wisdom and emotion and feeling that they need to connect with more. And I'd say that women already know that. They know that they have been in some ways trying to connect with that, and finally there's a body of wisdom information which is in some ways attesting to the knowledge of the female principle. And I think what's happening is that gradually men begin to connect with that, especially in these kinds of formats.
Do you find that, we're in a unique position because, 25 times a year and, 121 times, people come in literally from all over the world with their experiences, and males and females. And what we're finding, or my view of it, is that, it's coming almost like to the pyramid, that men, the male-female principle is a lot more balanced in people now.
Probably.
In a lot of people that, they're becoming like that, where they know they're in a male or a female body, but their identification is with the infinite or the oneness, or however you would look at it.
Right, and I think what that does is it creates an interesting opening, and at the same time it creates a lot of confusion. I think what happens is that when a man begins to get in touch with that balanced female side, suddenly what happens is the way in which he was taught to behave by his father or by the peers of men around him suddenly begins to get questioned, and it creates a lot of conflict. And it's a question of realizing what is the male, what is the masculine in the male, and what is just the male cultural baggage that's there that has to do with in some ways outmoded ways of being. And it's a question of realizing that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think the end is that everybody becomes androgynous and everybody smiles kind of benignly. I think the spark between the male and female, both in terms of internal process as well as external interchange in relationships, is very, very important. But I think that because of the surgence of this balance, we're all beginning to wonder what relationships really mean. It's a real interesting time. I mean, let's face it. I mean, relationship is one of the biggest issues that people are facing.
Well, the desire not to be alone. They don't feel full.
Well,
otherwise.
I think it's a combination. I mean, it's very interesting. There's a Tibetan teacher. His name was Gampopa. He said it's the sign of a superior person who treats all with equanimity and still has a few good friends. So I think that idea.
Well, you don't know the person from Cleveland, so I mean, it just you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't be as close to the person from Cleveland who you never met, but I mean, you could feel the same love for that person when you would.
You have essentially an objective love, and then you have a sense of affinity and a sense of connection with people. And I think it's like one does not contradict the other. It's possible to do both. And
well, in a human body, it's just it's the natural order. You know what I mean? I mean, unless we had a concept that it should be otherwise, you're going to be around certain people and not around others. And you're going to feel yourself drawn to them and not.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean you love them more.
That's right. That's right.
Do you know what I mean? It's like you like one ice cream more than another. It doesn't mean,
That's right.
Right.
You're not betraying all the other ice creams in the world by just liking one.
Or you like it better for that day.
Sure, exactly.
And it's only in every moment, and that's going to change
Exactly.
and move on, right?
Exactly.
And it's that whole thing of like getting back into the moment and living actually in every moment.
And being honest with yourself.
And being honest as you proceed in it.
And being honest with yourself. And I think what's interesting about that is when people are honest with themselves, it certainly makes things a little messy in the moment, but in the long run it makes things a lot cleaner.
How would you say it makes it messy? How does it work?
I think it's kind of like looking at the idea of that usually we are combinations of emotions and experiences. And what ends up happening is that sometimes that honesty makes us go through this kind of convolution of really trying to realize all the textures of what's going on. And when that happens, it's like we suddenly find ourselves maybe saying something which is awkward to another person, or expressing something which might be be something inside us which is not sort of like the most politically correct or most enlightened thing to say, but at the same time getting it out in the open and displaying it in some ways, that kind of honesty is basically cleaner in the long run, but at the same time makes us feel awkward and difficult. But when we finally break free, it's kind of like a caterpillar breaking out of its little cocoon. It breaks free and suddenly it feels that freshness. But up until that point, it's like, well, how do I explain this? How do I get out of this? And so what happens is it's literally allowing ourselves to experience that, which is both challenging, it's delightful, it's agonizing, and it's the most freeing thing we can do.
It's quite a trip here. And
yeah, it's quite a trip.
Right. So, I mean, do you see yourself, it's just a process with you, and I know that you're finding yourself being more drawn to not travel as much. We were talking about that earlier.
Right.
And so how do you see yourself sharing that love with people and not traveling?
Well, for one thing, what we want to do is we have websites, we have our books. We're wanting to do workshops closer to where we are. I think basically the reality is that after you travel a long time, you realize that for a lot of what you're doing is you're recovering from traveling if you're traveling all the time. And to me what that does is that in some ways is not conducive to living a more organic life. And I think what it also does as a result is it makes me more conceptual and less organic in what I'm wanting to present to people. So what we're finding is we're traveling smarter, but we also want to travel a little bit less. But at the same time, I think with the use of electronic media, you can reach a hell of a lot of people.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier.
Exactly, and that's what we really want to do.
Okay, so I think again we've come to the end of the show. I know it's amazing how fast these hours go, and I just want to thank Robert for coming, and
Thank you,
I hope you like the videos, and again, all your help has been so inspiring for us, and any way you really, I can't say this enough, any way you want to collaborate with us to spread that love, to share that joy, we're here, we're available. It's so important to us to have your input and to have all your love come back to us and go out again. So if you want any information on Robert or anything we're doing, 805-687-2053. That's Alan, 805-687-2053. Robert has workshops. He has the books. He's going to be around. They're still traveling all over. So if you want any information, call me at any time. We love you. Your participation is beyond important. So just know that. And thank you. God bless you. Good night. Come again. We do it for you and we do it for us. Good night.